Well, thank you so much, firstly, for the invitation here today. And it's wonderful to see a room so full of people who are enthusiastic to learn more about road verges and managing them in a better way. So I am the Road Verge campaign manager at Plant Life. The campaign has been running now since 2013, and I joined a couple of years ago when we had extra funding from the Prince of Wales's charitable fund to continue the work that we've been doing. So at the heart of the campaign sits our petition to councils, which now has a rather fantastic, almost 87,000 signatures. It's really taken off, which is really wonderful, and it's wonderful to see the amount of enthusiasm that there is for this campaign across the UK. So as well as this public side of the campaign, we also have the guidance that we produce as well. So there's a lot of love for verges in the room. There are so many of us here today, but I thought we'd go back and start with, well, why do verges matter? So over 45% of the total flora of the UK can be found on our road verges. That's over 700 species. Many of these are very common, but there are also real rarities that can now only be found on road verges. So road verges can support such high levels of biodiversity. So this is a wonderful amount of plant life, but also they're so important for the other wildlife that rely on this plant life. So they provide through from your first celandines in February through to devil's bit scabious at the end of the year. They're wonderful sources of pollen and nectar and provide sources of food for insect larvae and places for them to overwinter as well. When you consider that we've lost 97% of our wildflower meadows since the 1930s, we have got to a stage now where road verges really are a vital refuge for wildflowers. And as we like to say at Plant Life, where wildflowers lead, wildlife follows. So we're doing all we can to try and save wonderful wildflowers on our verges. So this leads us to Plant Life's vision. So all with what I've said in mind, plus the fact that there are nearly 500,000 kilometres of rural road verge in the UK, which equates to half of our remaining flower-rich grassland and meadows. We set out this vision, which simply put is to see all road verges managed for wildlife as a matter of course. That's restoring what we have already, but expanding these wonderful flower-rich habitats. That is for the sake of these wonderful plant species themselves, to help the common species and the rare species spread, for their own sakes, also for the enormous environmental benefits that they have. So you might have heard the term ecosystem services or natural capital. It's all of these wonderful benefits, whether it's flood alleviation or storing carbon, which I think some of our other speakers might be talking about today. All of these wonderful things, but also to enhance our contact with nature. So we know that for some people, and for a great majority of the 23 million road commuters that use the network every day, that road verges can be their only contact with nature. So it's really making these habitats that people drive past every day wonderful sites and to connect them with nature. We've set out this vision because there really has been a perfect storm for road verges. So there have been so many changes in the way that verges are managed in recent generations, pushing towards this trend of over-frequent managing. Now, this is a real problem when it stops plants from completing their whole life cycle and stops them from setting seed, so we get reduced seed set. Another problem is the increased nitrogen that we're seeing on our verges from emissions and from fertilizer runoff, but also coupled with the budget cuts that so many local authorities have been subjected to. So there really is such a problem, and a lot of our verges are now in quite a bad state. So the first thing that Plant Life did as part of this campaign was to produce the Good Verge Guide. So this guidance is a great way into verges and good ways to manage them. And it really sets out a way that a good management regime that can maximize the diversity of flowering plants that you can find in verges and all the other benefits that I've spoken about to other invertebrates and other wildlife, all of your bugs and butterflies and bees and bats and birds, all of the things that can be found on your road verges. But it's also important to say that this sort of management also keeps the roads safe for motorists, which is a key part of the campaign as well. So a lot of the work we've been doing in the last couple of years has really been to raise awareness and share our vision of verges, but also to challenge the status quo. So verges can be a lot more than these scrubby wastelands or neat sort of sterile lawns that might flash by in your car window. And it's been really positive to see in the last couple of years how much good publicity there has been in the press and how this has really started to be taken up by members of the public, lobbying their councils, and this awareness has been raised with the local authorities themselves. And we've really started to see a shift in perceptions, which is now starting to turn into action on the ground. So last year, in order to keep this momentum going, we wanted to create a technical guidance to transform the way that our road verges are managed. And it was really important to us in this scheme that we brought together expertise from across different sectors. So this guide was put together with other wildlife organisations, from different highways and statutory agencies, and from industry, to bring together this expertise to create a best practice guidance with lots of detailed information about how to manage the grassland soft estate. So this is a technical guide, but a practical guide for anybody who is engaged in verge management. And it sets out a different approach to management of grassland verges, one that we can improve the biodiversity value of our verges whilst reducing the long-term management costs. And the real aim of this is to shift the balance of the habitats that we see across our soft estate, so that a species-rich habitat becomes the predominant asset. So we launched this back at the end of September last year, and it's been very full-on ever since, getting this out to lots of different councils and local authorities and highways agencies to really push this forward. So I thought I would give you a whistle-stop tour through the guidelines. There are 3 sections in the guidelines, one on assessment, the major section is one on management, and then there's a section on monitoring at the end. So start at the beginning. Assessment, so understanding what you have, understanding the existing biodiversity value of your verges. This is so important to inform appropriate and, importantly, if you have to manage the budget as well, a cost-effective management regime. And it's really useful to put this sort of information into the contracts and to help you to understand the broad habitat types that you might have. So there are 3 main grassland classifications that are throughout the guidelines. There's amenity grassland, open or aesthetic grassland, and then also species-rich grassland is covered as well. So in this assessment section, it looks at the different ways that you can assess what you have, whether that's by remote surveys, so desktop surveys, looking at historical records, photographs, biological records, whatever they might be, or by drive-by surveys or botanical surveys. There are lots of ways you can do this. One of the really important things is that once you have this information, if it can be integrated into the mapping systems that are used to know where to manage the network. So the main section of the guide is our management specifications. This section really starts off with some really good principles, and if you take anything away with this, sort of 5 good principles that will help increase wildflower diversity on verges. The first of these is that some sort of regular annual management is really essential. So we know that if management doesn't happen, even for a year or 2 years, that you will see a decline in the diversity of species that you have. The timing of that management is really critical. So you want to let flowers complete their whole life cycle. so that they will grow, flower, and set seed, ideally before you cut them. And this will help your natural colonization processes. The third of those is cut and collect, which you'll be hearing a lot more about today as well. The main sort of goal behind this is to reduce the nutrient levels on verges where the nutrients has been increasing over many years through cut and drop processes where the grass is just left on the verge to mulch in. And this, by cutting and collecting, you're also opening up the sward, which again can help with natural colonization. And an important thing as well, that cut and collect can also help to reduce your management burden over time. And then the final two link together. So really engaging people whenever changes are made to the management strategy. Communicating those changes is really important to the success of the project. But also there's a great asset in a very enthusiastic volunteer groups that exist, and there are quite a few people that have such projects on the ground, and these are really important for the ongoing success of transforming our verges too. In the guidelines, as I said, so timing is really key. We set out this management calendar, which gives lots of different options. Ideally, a two-cut management approach would be the one that we would say to be adopted. And there are different ways you can do this. This could be a summer and autumn cutting regime, or a late winter and an autumn cutting regime. And you can see different combinations of this here, and there's a lot more detail in the guidance itself. Sometimes only one cut is possible, and where that is the case, cutting once between the August and the end of September, and removing those cuttings where possible is what we would suggest. And there are different options if you have dry and short verges, or whether you have really species-rich verges as well. So in our management section, there are 6 main sections which look at different scenarios, different types of grassland, and the best practice management for that. And the first one of these is amenity grassland. So as things stand, a lot of this has little biodiversity value, but it has such huge potential. Sometimes when people think of increasing wildflowers on verges, they think of a very tall, traditional meadow type look, but actually you can achieve a really short sward that can be tightly mown. It looks very neat and tidy, but it can be very rich in flowers, which again is really useful for pollinators. So this can be very good in your urban areas, and a lot can be done to maintain these type of verges using cut and collect. So there's a brilliant project down in Dorset using these Grillo ride-on mowers to use cut and collect to collect the arisings from the verge, create a nice, attractive finish. This is reducing the soil fertility over time, and also the management burden, and creating these wonderful flower-rich but very short verges. So the second section is restoring open grasslands. Now, most of the softer state is likely to have been affected either by overmanagement, so too frequent cutting, or by undermanagement, where it's been neglected. And in this case, some sort of initial restoration is really useful to kickstart the process of getting the verge back into a better shape. Often this does need intensive output initially, but the costs of doing this can be reduced over the medium term. And we'd suggest in these sort of situations that restoration is focused on initial areas that you know to be species rich, if you have them, and sort of working outwards from there. Sort of 3 things that are very useful when starting this sort of work is to communicate that management changes are happening, so people know what's going on. That can be through press releases or simply signs that are put up on the verge, and this can help a lot. Often, I get asked a lot when talking to councils, people say it looks messy. What do I do if we're changing a regime and we're letting it grow longer? something as simple as framing your verges by cutting sort of either a swathe cut or a meter cut around the edge of it can make it look like the management is intentional. That it might seem rather sort of straightforward to say, but it looks that it's supposed to happen, and it can be much more acceptable to people to go about it, doing it this way, and also to engage your community and volunteers to help you restore your grassland can be very helpful and can push things forward at a quicker pace and see better results in a quicker time as well. So 3 key things to consider with this is that variety within your verges, especially wide verges, is key. So there's sort of structural diversity from a very short sward at the front through longer wildflowers and then to scrub at the back. If this can be achieved on a wider verge, this is sort of the ideal management zones that we would have across the width of the verge. This is great for both the plant diversity, but also all of the insects and other wildlife diversity that you would see throughout the verge. And importantly, this is can help maintain the sight lines that need to be maintained on stretches of road where visibility is really important. So cutting your 1 meter swathe, if you have a very wide verge at the front, you'd have your visibility cut, and this also helps build in the structural diversity to your verge as well. And 2 other things to mention, yellow rattle, which I'm sure many of you might be familiar with. It's a semi-parasitic species on grass and other species. It can act as nature's lawnmower, or in meadow circles it's known as the meadow maker. It can reduce the quantity of grass growth that you would have, and therefore help your ongoing management burdens. And also bare ground. So if part of your restoration process, scarification of the ground is possible, this can help with germination of new species to the verge and to support the natural colonization processes, and is also very beneficial to different invertebrate species that you could have in the verge as well. So then the next 2 sections look at maintaining and restoring species-rich grasslands. So these might be your roadside nature reserves or your local wildlife sites, whatever they might be called. So maintenance, really good maintenance of this site offers the maximum biodiversity value for the input that you put into it. So cutting and collecting after seed set is really important on these types of verges to maintain low soil fertility and to really push the biodiversity value of your verges. And we'd always say in these cases where specialist advice is needed, do seek it where you have protected species on the verge. The next step of this is restoration of these sites. So these verges can, and all verges can actively, if they're not actively managed, they can quickly lose the wonderful value that they have. But all is not lost if, for whatever reason, these haven't been maintained as well. Often the wildflowers can still be there in the sward itself or dormant in the seed bank. And by adopting the good management techniques that we set out in this guide, this can really help to rehabilitate the verges and will help bring back and transform these verges to the state that they perhaps once were. There is also advice in the guidance on managing problem and competitive species, but the last management section is on creating new species-rich grassland. This can be a really sustainable and cost-effective way of transforming the softer state, especially when new roads have been put in. It can look really attractive and wonderful. This lovely example is down on the Weymouth Relief Road, which I was lucky enough to visit last year. And the main guiding principle that you're going to hear about later on today, I think as well, is to avoid fertile topsoil when in these situations when you're trying to create new species-rich grassland verges. There are many different methods that you can use to create new species-rich verges, whether that's using natural colonization from a nearby species-rich verge, or through natural seeding, or through bought mixes. Here I would also say that we also have guidance at Plant Life on sort of the best seed stocks to use. So we have a document called Keeping the Wild in Wildflower, which is available on our website, which is also useful. So the one thing that I would say is to be mindful of the provenance of the seeds that you would be using in any creation of new sites. And it's also important to say that it's not just new sites that this can be created on. This can also be done on existing verges that are species poor. So then the last bit in the guidance looks at monitoring. So this is very useful if you want to inform future management going forwards, but also for measuring how your contract is performing. If you managed the highways and management program, we often don't have much data about how well protected sites or how well restoration goes. So this sort of monitoring over time can be really wonderful. Again, like the assessment at the beginning, it can be done through lots of different types of surveys. And it's also, again, important to integrate this back into any mapping systems that might be used. So you have this continual cycle of good or better management happens, and you see how this goes, and then the results of that go on to inform future management. And again, like assessment and the management as well, the support and assistance and harnessing the energy of local volunteer groups is a really useful thing to bear in mind from a local authority point of view when you're working on monitoring of different sites. So throughout the guidelines, there are different case studies from projects around the UK. So we really wanted to show in these guidelines that this sort of good management can be successfully implemented on the ground. Two examples here, the Sheffield Living Highways project. They looked a lot at changing the different cutting regimes and communicating this to the public, what was acceptable and what wasn't, and how successful this would be. So that's a really good case study to check out. On a slightly different side of things, the Conwy Portals study along the A55 in North Wales used green hay from a neighbouring species-rich meadow to restore the verges. So there are lots of different approaches, and these case studies give you a wonderful insight into how it's possible to implement this on the ground. Now, I wanted to give a mention to some of the Verge projects that I know are happening out there. This is a very embarrassing moment if I put your photo up, sorry. So there are lots of wonderful Verge groups springing up around the country. So I thought I'd mention a few of them here. In Hereford, we have the lovely Verging on Wild, and there are a few of their group are here today. They are doing amazing work with the contractors, Balfour Beatty, with the local council, and are really pushing forward with trials in local parishes. In neighbouring Shropshire, the Restoring Shropshire's Verges project. This is now a partnership of the volunteer groups, Carings for God's Acre, the National Trust, the AONB, the council itself, and we're involved supporting this as well. Looking at engaging the local communities through a variety of different ways and taking this forward into the management regime, so cutting less and later and making sure that that sort of middle window in the summer is left clear of cutting. And then some others to mention that are all a good mix of collaboration between local groups and the highways authorities. Down in East Sussex, you have Wildflower Lewis, for example, who are successful in lobbying their town council not to top up the 2 cuts that East Sussex County Council had said that they would fund that year, and they're working on projects to use yellow rattle and with engagement boards throughout the town centre. In Gloucestershire, this was really sort of pushed forward from the councillors to start with. There's a nice how-to and top tips from Rachel Smith, the Green Party councillor for Stroud, on how she formed the biodiversity task group and what that looked to do. In Denbighshire, they now have almost 80% of their road network on a biodiversity cut, so they're cutting it once from the beginning of August onwards, and they're working more and more to find ways in which they can bring cut and collect into the network as well. And then down in Devon, a lovely project which has just come to an end, I think, really engaging volunteers and a wonderful effort to adopt some of these verges and manage them a lot better for wildlife. And then, this is sort of, as I get towards the end, I wanted to end on a positive note. So, for many of you, I'm sure that trying to campaign and lobby for changes to our Verge network feels like it's been a very long time coming. But a lot of amazing work is happening out there, and the work we're doing at Plant Life is to really encourage and support as much of that forward as we can, so we can see a transformation of road verges and of the network across the UK. So these are just a few favourite photos which I hope will be inspiration to you as well. And to end on that encouraging note forward, we're in the process of putting together a Verges hub on our Road Verge campaign website to showcase and celebrate the process, the progress that is happening around the country. So please do get in touch with us, let us know about your projects, whether that's through talking to us today or emailing us and getting in touch. We're very happy. So a lot of the work I do is going out and talking to local authorities and their contractors and helping to support local Verge groups that are looking to improve the state of their verges, whether that's in their parish or sort of county-wise as well. So please do get in touch, and we'll try and support you however we can do. And that is really the sort of the main aim of the new guidelines itself, is to provide a guidance in order for councils and local authorities and highways to fulfill their statutory biodiversity duties, and to enable us to raise the bar on verges across the whole estate, so that once again we see wonderful colour coming back to our verges. That's all from me. My email address is there, and if I have time, any questions, but if not, come and chat to me throughout the day. Thank you.